Good morning. So last week, so we'll start right into it. Last week's homework assignment was three things. I asked you to look up the what Altus Group, what ICI World, and what CoStar Group were. What were those three companies and what did they do? What the two of them, CoStar Group and Altus, what they do is they supply commercial information to commercial agents. And that is a subscription-based service that they provide. Some agents certainly don't think it's necessary. Other agents certainly think it is necessary, and it's based on cost to a large degree. Altus is the Canadian company in the group. CoStar is largely a US company and has made inroads in Canada in the last 4 or 5 years. What they both provide is they provide information on properties that you can get the landlord's information from them. And even if it is an incorporation, you can get the contact information from the people who are running that incorporation. So what it is, to a large extent, one of the main features that they have is that it's a lead generation program that you can find out from both companies. You can find out let's say you're looking at a building in Markham, an office building in Markham. You can find out who the main person who is in charge of renting space in that building, or you can even find the renters' names in that building, and you can contact them and see when their lease ends, how much they're paying, and can you find them other space. There are lots of people, lots of commercial agents out there who are trolling through the CoStar and Altus websites to try to get business. The other way, of course, is that if you have somebody who's looking for space, CoStar and Altus have all sorts of listings that are not listed anywhere else. Depending on who you listen to, I would take a guess that they probably have about 25% of listings for leased space. I think they probably have about 15% of listings for sale space that is not listed anywhere else. So it does all sorts of things for you, these two companies. Now it comes with a subscription fee. The subscription fee for those two companies, if everybody is sitting down, the subscription fee for those two companies is, Altus is about $3,600 a year. CoStar is more expensive. They're at about $5,000 to $5,400 per year. And generally for a real estate company such as ourselves, we need to have a minimum of between 8 and 10 people to join. If they have only 1 or 2 people, it runs into the thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars a year, and it wouldn't be interesting to join. Now, is that a good thing to have, to join those two companies? Well, or join one of those companies anyways. If it costs you as a commercial realtor, let's just say $4,000 for the year, and you, because you're a member of those two, one of those companies, you can get for $4,000 fee, you can get 2 extra leases that you get paid $2,000 for per lease. Gee whiz, that's probably worth your while. And some people think about doing it and other people don't. Let's just see here what's going on. Hang on a second here. Can you please leave the presentation document now? I can print and write some notes on it. I don't understand what that is, so I'm sorry. I'm not going to leave the presentation now, no. So I don't know, I'll open it up. Ash, what do you think? Would you pay $4,000 to join this?
I would think about it. Like right now, I have a couple of clients that are looking for commercial. Would that constitute or would help with a couple of clients? Probably not. But maybe if my client base in commercial is a little bigger than that, then yes, definitely.
Yeah, so that's a good answer, Ash. A lot of people say as my client base in commercial grows, then perhaps I would look at that. The only counter argument I have to that is without one of these programs, perhaps you're limiting yourself on how your commercial business can grow. What about you, Pauline? I see you have your microphone off. Would you consider doing something like this just out of general discussion? Don't know if we lost her there. No, I think, well, my screen, oh, I see. So I think they may share the document. Can you see it, Ash?
I see just commercial training week 5.
Yeah, that's all I have. That's all I have right now on the screen. I haven't changed any slides from commercial training week 5. I haven't done anything else. That's all I've got on the screen so far. We're just discussing last week before we get into this week's program. Does anybody else have any comments about Altus or CoStar? I think, Chris, do you have any comments?
Wow.
Nobody else has any comments about it, eh? Okay. So Pauline, the only screen that I have on so far is commercial 5 training. I'm not running any other slides other than commercial 5 training right now.
Thank you.
Okay. Can I mention the difference between the two? Sure. The difference between CoStar and Altus. CoStar is more expensive, and they're more expensive because they seem to have more information about properties for sale than Altus, but they also come at a much higher cost of about $300 a month. They would cost you roughly almost $5,000 to $6,000 a year, where Altus would cost you $3,000 to $4,000 a year. That's the main difference. I think personally Altus is better for the value of the money. That difference, I think Altus is a superior program myself. But I just wanted to make sure everybody saw what the differences are, and just to let you know. Some of the big commercial companies out there, such as a CBRE, a Cushman and Wakefield, every one of their commercial agents has access to this as part of the deal. When you join one of those guys, that you need to have access to it and you need to pay their subscription fee. And that's what makes them stand out as big commercial brokerages, as opposed to Century 21 Heritage Group, which is basically a residential brokerage, trying to move into the commercial field just a little bit. And until we get enough agents interested in paying that subscription fee, we sort of stay a little bit smaller than some of the big guys. Okay. How much would the discounted rate be for Altus if I print it right? Well, we need about 10 people to join. And if we get about 10 people to join, then it costs about $3,000 to $3,500 per year to join. Okay. So the one we've left out here is ICI World. That was the last one. ICI World is a program that every agent can join. Can access right now, and it has all sorts of listings on there that you cannot find on MLS or LoopNet or RealNet or any of the other ones. ICI World is open to everybody to see what the listings are, including the general public. But if you want to post a listing on ICI World, you have to pay a subscription fee, and the subscription fee is $319 plus HST.
$19.
Yes, everybody, once again, the only slide I have running right now is commercial training week 5. I have not changed slides yet. I'm still talking about last week's program, okay? We'll get into this week's program just as we make sure everybody understands the difference between Altus, CoStar, and ICI World. So ICI World is a program for agents. If you want to put a listing on it, you have to pay $319 plus HST. If you have a commercial seller or a leaser, landlord that wants to list, and you're in competition with other brokerages, you may want to say to them, I'll put you on ICI World, which reaches out to around the world, basically, that people can see it, but it'll cost you $319 to get a subscription for 1 year on ICI World, okay? Is it possible to pay as one subscriber and let others use that? You know, probably. I don't think ICI World is as sophisticated as the Toronto Real Estate Board is, that they would catch your IP address if you're sharing your login information. But don't forget that anybody can look at the listings, but you can only list if you have paid your subscription fee. So if somebody wanted to use it, they can use it today, but if they wanted to list a property, Mazzy, it would come through as your listing, not somebody else's, okay? Okay, so wonderful. So does anybody else have any questions about those 3 companies? All righty then. So moving on to this week's training. Clauses. Well, 1 second here to see the chat. I'm considering ICI. Yeah, I mean, you can look at all the listings on it now on ICI, Ash, and you know, if your tenants are looking for something and you haven't been able to find anything, I'd highly recommend you look at ICI World. There's a lot of real estate agents that have listings on there that pay their $319 subscription fee so they can put their listings on it. And there's a lot of private people that pay $319 to put their listings on it. As an example, if a private person owns 4 or 5 gas stations and wants to sell one, he's not going to have a problem paying $319. And most of them will work with cooperating agents. And so you'll get paid a commission if you reach out to them. So definitely. Okay, so this week, clauses. Clauses. I just want to remind everybody that residential and commercial clauses or conditions are interchangeable. No, Paula, there's not. Okay. You can, after this, you can go into your Google Drive and you can print it out. Okay. And if everybody remembers that for next week, then you can go into your Google Drive. That's where these slideshows are. You can print it out and be prepared prior to joining the meeting. So residential and commercial clauses or conditions are interchangeable. So don't forget that. You know, there's a lot of residential clauses that work for commercial and vice versa. For buyers, the paperwork. So working with a commercial realtor. So the working with a realtor brochure that you use for residential, there's also a commercial one, all right? It states that the salesperson is a commercial realtor. This assumes that in general you are an expert in your field. If you are doing a commercial transaction, you should use commercial form 815 instead of the working with a realtor residential one, okay? Of course, it's the same as the residential one, Form 815. It differentiates, it's basically the same thing except commercial realtor. It does differentiate between a client and a customer, and it also indicates what multiple representation is, and it's exactly the same that the buyer or the tenant has to initial beside either the customer or the client box and then sign at the bottom that they understand what relationship they are entering into. So it's virtually the same document as the residential working with the realtor form. Buyer representation agreements. The buyer representation agreement there is no BRA for commercial leases, okay? It's Form 300. It's the same as the residential one. If you recall from Form 300, it says for sale or for a lease. It does not distinguish between residential or commercial. You use BRA, the regular one for leases, okay? Form 545, it's a buyer customer service agreement. The buyer customer service agreement is very similar to the residential buyer customer service agreement. Would anybody like to take a guess at when you would use a buyer customer service agreement as opposed to a BRA? Got a bunch of shy people today. Normally I would say if anybody doesn't want to hold up their hand, or is everybody too shy to hold up their hands to say something? Of course, you would use the buyer customer service agreement for commercial if you were also representing the listing as a client, right? At Century 21 Heritage Group, we try to avoid multiple representation with the same agent. So if you have a listing where you have a client seller or a client landlord, you would use 545 as the tenant, right? Just the same way as in residential, okay? However, for a sale, for a purchase, it is a different BRA, okay? It is Form 540, all right? It's a little bit different from Form 300 that you're used to in residential, and that in the Form 300, it's kind of a little bit gray on who pays commission and why if the buyer decides to go outside of our own brokerage. In Form 540, it is very, very, very clear how you can collect money from a commercial buyer, okay? So you should try to become familiar with some of these forms. Form 500. Form 500 is the commercial agreement of purchase and sale used for commercial freehold properties, not condos, okay? Form 500 can be for the purchase of a building. It can also be used in combination if the building also has a business in it. You can use the same form for both a building property and a business in it, okay? It gets a little bit complicated to do this, but sometimes it's the easiest way to do it, okay? The purchase of an unoccupied commercial building is straightforward: financing, inspections, electrical, environmental. However, if you include a business in the same building and the same form, you must put these details in Schedule A using necessary clauses, and we're going to talk about those clauses. C519. C519 is a very, very, very common commercial clause to use, okay? If you remember from last week, we talked about what it means when a seller represents and warrants, okay? C519 has, I think it's 19 clauses in total in it, and not all of them are used for every different kind of transaction, okay? You have to read through it and pick the ones that you need, okay? So we're going to go through them. So number one, the business is being carried on in compliance with zoning, government regulations, and any applicable restrictive covenants, right? Any outstanding work orders, demands, or notices of defaults existing prior to close will be rectified before closing. This is a great clause to use to make sure that everything is going to be cleaned up, okay? Number 2, any claims that are made by any person of a result of anything done prior to the completion date are the responsibility of the seller and not the responsibility of the buyer. This is the seller represents and warrants these things, that it's going to be taken care of prior to the completion date. The most recent grossly weak sales have been approximately so much money, and hours of operation are currently blah, 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 with the operation of the current business as conducted by the seller being permitted. This is a good one if you're trying to figure out what are sales like. Okay, number 4, this is a very, very, very common one, okay, that after the completion of the purchase, the seller remain in a training capacity with the business for, sometimes you can fill in the number of days, you can change this to number of weeks, you could change it to the number of months, okay, specifying which hours the seller has to be there, okay, and shall introduce the buyer to all people and companies. From the balance on closing, the seller's solicitor will hold so much money in trust pending receipt of the buyer's written confirmation that training has been completed. What does that mean? That means that there's a holdback that will not be paid to the seller until the training has been completed. This is really important so that the seller is going to be obligated to show up for so many days from the hours of such and such to such and such, or else the seller is not going to receive the money that is being held back. This is a common clause that is used. I have seen that this is as high as $50,000 and $60,000 that is being held back by the seller's lawyer. It could be the buyer's lawyer as well, by the way, being held back, okay, until the seller has completed the training, all right? It's really important that the seller is being held to it. Now, sometimes with number 4, the seller wants to be paid, in which case you would have to, rejig this paragraph a little bit, that the seller will be paid at an hourly rate of, 20 or 30 or 40 or 50 or 60, whatever, dollars per hour during this, but you can still have the holdback, okay, that he's going to be there and he's going to fulfill his obligations after completion. So that's 4 of them. Any questions so far?
All good.
All good so far? Okay.
Okay.
Next, number 5, there are no facts not generally known to the public, which if known to the buyer might reasonably be expected to deter the buyer or cause the buyer not to complete the transaction. This is basically a latent defect clause to a large extent, okay, or might adversely affect the business carried on at a leased premises in the future, if it is a leased premises, all right? There are no legal, equitable, administrative, or other claims, proceedings, investigations, injunctions, restrictions, blah, 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 against the business. The seller is representing and warranting this. If there's a restaurant involved, any existing exhaust system, how about heating, ventilation, are all in good working order, and the roof does not leak or contain any accumulation of grease. This would be a really stupid sentence to put in if you were buying a bookstore. There's not going to be any accumulation of grease on the roof of a bookstore. So you have to make sure you're picking and choosing which sentences in here you're going to use. All right. The inventory clause. If there is no inventory included in a business or just it's a vacant property, you wouldn't use this, but you would use the second one because it says the premise shall be left in reasonably clean condition. This is the same as the residential clean condition clause. All right. Number 9, documentation will be executed and delivered to the buyer solicitor on closing, which would be kind of normal. All right. And the adjusted balance may be held by the seller solicitor for 4 business days after closing so that the buyer's solicitor can check that everything has been paid that the seller owes. Okay. the trade name. Okay, the trade name of the business will be transferred, as well as the business telephone number. Now, I would highly suggest that, including the business telephone number, I would highly suggest that you would amend this if there is an internet address, if there's an internet service provider, if there's a fax number, if there's an email that is being used consistently. You would have to add these things into number 10. All right. Number 11. On closing, all leases, licenses, warranties, maintenances, and blah, 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 blah. And then down into it, it goes, if lottery sales form a part of the existing business, understood that any agreement permitting such sales might not be assignable to the buyer, in which event the seller will use best efforts to assist the buyer with any possible transfer. Okay? If you're buying a convenience stores and there's a lottery, then a lottery sales included in that convenience store, the license cannot automatically be transferred to the buyer of that convenience store. The buyer has to go through some paperwork and application process to facilitate that transfer. If the buyer has a previous criminal record, they will not be approved. So be sure that you are looking at this very carefully if lottery sales are part of this. And when we get to the Liquor Control Board clause, it's basically the same thing, okay? Number 12 carries on with it. Should any special licenses be needed by the buyer to continue to run the existing business, the seller is going to help the buyer do that, okay? Has to participate in that. If the business is a franchise, the written consent of the franchises will be provided to permit the transfer of a franchise to the buyer. We're going to talk further about franchises in another course, but this, in another session, I should say, but this is one of the typical clauses that you need to have for a franchise, okay? Number 15, we've talked about HST a lot. It'll register before closing to allow a joint election. That HST will not affect the sale, okay? We've talked about that a lot, HST. Number 16, of course, pertaining to the business use of any systems. Oh, sorry, I missed the liquor license clause. The reason at the top here, the liquor license clause is omitted from here is because it's a really, really, really long clause. And the liquor license clause basically says that the buyer has an opportunity to investigate that the license can be transferred, that the buyer has a chance to do the transfer, and it's a condition that the buyer is able to complete the transfer with the help of the seller. The business premises are not affected by any existing urea formaldehyde foam installation, no radon gas, noxious substances. If all you're doing is purchasing a vacant piece of commercial land, do you need to have this in? Yes, but you take out the word business. You would say the premises, okay? Should this offer include a chattel mortgage back? Okay, such a mortgage will contain clauses, et cetera, and on or before closing, an acknowledgement will be provided to the buyer by any mortgagees with respect to the real property that, or leases that it'll be taken care of. So 19 clauses that you guys need to consider when you are doing a commercial offer, okay? Every time you guys do a commercial offer or a commercial lease, whether it's for the sale of a business, the lease of a property, the purchase of a business, the purchase of a property, you should be looking at C519 and seeing what clauses are applicable to the transaction. You cannot just simply copy and paste this in. Commercial sales are a little more complicated. You need to make sure that you've read these clauses, that you understand the clauses, and you put the appropriate clauses in the Schedule A. So, for example, are you going to include the liquor clause when you are purchasing a bookstore? And the answer is no. Are you going to include the lottery sentence? The answer is no. Are you going to worry about number 18 and 19 if there's no mortgage being held back? The answer is no. But are you going to include the seller staying on to show how the business works clause when you're buying a vacant property or leasing a vacant property? The answer is no, okay? You've got to read this clause, okay? And make sure you're picking the right sentences out of each one. So let me look at the chat here. Where is C519? C519 is in web forms still, and it is also in your transaction desk. They're both there. It's there in both of them. If you have a problem finding it, let me know, okay? Any other questions about C519? I know it's got a lot in it, and I know I throw it all at you really quickly, but the whole idea behind C519 is that it's a very comprehensive clause that covers just all sorts of things that can be used in a commercial transaction. If I go back a few slides, you will also see that there's C516, okay? C516 is covered in next week's class, so I don't overload you too much all in one class, okay? So I'm stopping at C519 today. But if you want to review C516, next week, so that you become familiar with it, between C519 and C516, just about every commercial clause is covered to a large extent. The basics of structuring a commercial offer or a commercial lease, whether it's for the sale of a property or for the sale of a business or a lease, those two clauses, C519 and C516, cover an incredible amount of the clauses that you normally are required to use. But we'll do C516 next week, unless I scared you all away. So, forms, next. Or should I say, anybody have any other questions about 519, or have I put everybody asleep by now?
I've got a question. It's not on the topic of C519. It's just on the presentation itself. Can we access the recording afterwards? Jean, you might have mentioned that before, but I missed it.
I think, Tina, I think I saw that the record button was on. Tina, are you listening right now? I'll send her a quick text. Ash, just stand by for 1 second.
Thank you.
We have a question here.
Yeah.
For those clauses in C519, I believe these clauses are from the brokerage, right? And these are the supplements. And if I want to, I can find some more in the Ontario clauses as well.
Oh, absolutely, Pauline. Great question. There is lots and lots and lots of other commercial clauses and conditions in the OREA forms. Absolutely. What we've tried to do here in C519 is kind of encapsulate, and in C516, kind of try to encapsulate the majority of the more simple common clauses that are used in a commercial transaction.
All right, okay, thank you.
You're welcome. I've I've texted Tina to see if this is being recorded or not. And hopefully she'll get back to me. I'll let you know.
Thanks.
So forms, no problem. Yes, Ash, yes. So forms. So here they are. 500 is the agreement of purchase and sale commercial. We talked about that. And included in Form 500, if you have a property that has a business in it, you can put it in Form 500 along with the property. Form 501, the agreement of purchase and sale for a condominium resale. Same as for Form 500, you can have the condominium resale. If there is a business included in the sale, you can also put that into Form 501, okay? If the business is in a leased premises, there's a specific form, it's Form 502, business in a leased premises. Form 510 and 511, agreement to lease, the commercial long form and the commercial short form. And 515 is an agreement to sublease for commercial, okay? There are cheat sheets available at your front desks, just like residential. They're also in Transaction Desk. They're also on Google Drive. Your cheat sheets, there's a cheat sheet for Form 500. There's a cheat sheet for Form 501. There's a cheat sheet for Form 502. There's a cheat sheet for Form 511, the commercial short form. There is no cheat sheet for commercial long form or sublease commercial. And the reason why there is no cheat sheet for 510 or 515 is the cheat sheet is just about as long as the actual form, so it didn't make sense to do it. If you're going to do a sublease or a commercial long form, then you and I have to work on it together because they're complicated forms to fill out. Okay, otherwise there's a cheat sheet and the front desk can type your form for you. Let me get back to you on that one, Chris, okay? I'll have to stop the slideshow and get out of my share screen to look for it for you, okay? Just bear with me, okay? Sorry, somebody else had a question there?
Yeah, John, Bear is here. I don't know if the question is for this session might be the right moment to ask it or not, but anyhow, if it is right, then sometimes when you're already dealing with the commercials, the type of contract that owner is already bringing is totally different. So it doesn't have any of the forms. And sometimes it doesn't make sense at all because, for instance, I had a case, actually in that time I was not the agent, but we were going for a lease for one of our friends. And basically the other agent who was the listing agent, she put everything together, I think copy and paste from different scenarios like the plaza and also shopping center all together. It was a mix and it was 40 pages long with a lot of nonsenses, and also some of them were really related. So how do we handle these cases, or what is the suggestion here?
Great. So great question. So first of all, can you complete a transaction without using the OREA forms? And the answer is yes, absolutely. Okay. However, when you're using a non-OREA form, the requirement is still that you need a confirmation of cooperation and representation. And if you're representing the side of the tenant or the buyer, you would still require a buyer representation agreement, okay? And you would still require the working with a commercial realtor brochure. But can you use another, can somebody just write out on a piece of paper all the clauses and conditions and stuff, and then use the other forms that are required by OREA? The answer is absolutely yes, 100%. And it happens on a regular basis, Baruz, just to let you know. Now, to get back to this deal that you worked on and it was all jumbled, well, you know, what's one of the clauses you should always have, right? You should always have a lawyer's review of the document. And so if you can't communicate effectively with somebody who doesn't know what they're doing and they're insisting that it's correct, put in a lawyer's review clause and make sure that the tenant or the buyer's lawyer is reviewing the lease documentation or the agreement of purchase and sale, whatever form it has arrived on, to make sure that it's okay. All right?
Yeah, awesome. Thank you.
You are more than welcome. And getting back to Chris's question, Chris, I was having a blank there on where C519 and C516 is, and you are right, and I thank you for the correction. C519 is in commercial clauses on your Google Drive. C519 and C516 is in commercial clauses on your Google Drive. It is not in web forms or transaction desk. I apologize for the confusion.
Excuse me.
I hear somebody saying something there, but I don't, if you're not talking loud enough.
Excuse me, John.
Okay, got your mic, yes.
Yeah. Regarding two forms, 510 and 511, when we have to use 510 and when we will use 511?
Right, so we're going to go through them right now.
Okay.
So Form 500, I'll get to that, and we're just going to go through them when you use them, okay? Form 500, you use for all commercial sales except for sale of a business and a lease premises, a commercial condominium sale, or any of the lease forms, or a share purchase. And on the right-hand side, I say what it's used for. Vacant commercial land, used for office buildings, used for plaza, used for businesses and property that are tied together, used for standalone commercial properties. And the last one, it says can be used for a share purchase, but that it's really complicated. Share purchases are usually initiated by a letter of intent. Letter of intents are, we actually have a couple in Google Drive for you guys, but I'm recommending that at this stage of your careers, maybe most of you would not get into a share purchase right away. It can be really, really complicated. And the reason why it is complicated, we've talked about this before, you have to be very careful with a share purchase. Why? And the reason why is that a share purchase is not mandated by the Real Estate Council of Ontario. It is overseen by the Security and Exchange Commission. And so there's always questions about whether errors and omissions insurance would be protected in a share, if you would have errors and omissions insurance in a share purchase. So if you do have something that's going to happen with a share purchase before you get involved in it, please contact me, okay? But there's Form 500. Form 501. 501, basically the same as Form 500, except it's for a commercial condo resale. Basically the same thing. If there's a business in it, you can combine the business and the sale of the property using Form 501. Form 502, sale of a business in a leased premises, okay? Form 502 is a really interesting form. It has a lot of clauses in it and conditions already pre-printed in the form. For example, the first paragraph says it must have a copy of the lease for the buyer's approval. In Form 502, you do not need to include this in Schedule A. It's already pre-printed as part of the conditions in the form. Obviously, if you're purchasing a business in a leased premises, you would want to see what the lease looks like from the landlord. And you know, you're just not going to buy the business without knowing what the lease is. So it's so important it's already part of the pre-printed agreement. You must distinguish between the sellers and the landlord's chattels, okay? Who's going to be responsible for what in the agreement, okay? And let me give you a great example. We ran into a problem where, and I might have mentioned this already, I'm thinking now, but we ran into an example where the tenant had installed a vent through the roof for a stove in a restaurant, okay? And the landlord agreed to the tenant doing that at the tenant's expense, okay? When the lease ended, the tenant took the fixture with him, and the tenant was forced to put the fixture back in, was forced to put it back in. It became a fixture and it became part of the property of the landlord. Okay, it was not clearly defined in the agreement to lease who got what fixtures at the end of the lease. So be careful, okay? When it comes time to chattels and fixtures, all right? So the last one, of course, is the buyer doing something to the business that is going to change the business. And I can give you another example of this that we ran into, that the buyer was purchasing a business that was a food wholesale business, okay? And the buyer was going to change that to a full service restaurant business, okay? The wholesale business, they were packaging food there, they were making food there. So a lot of the equipment, the stoves, the fridges, the freezers, all that kind of stuff was in place already. The venting, everything was in place. And he wanted to change it to a restaurant business, and the zoning was denied. Do not just assume, because they are similar businesses, that the zoning will be approved. And the reason why the zoning was denied was because of parking. They had parking for the wholesale business for 2 or 3 employees, but as soon as you turned it into a 36 seat restaurant, the township said, no, you don't have enough parking. And so it was denied. So don't assume that the zoning can be carried over, okay? Any questions so far? Okay. 1 second, please. Yes, Tina says that she's recording this. I don't know how to access that recording yet. And so maybe I can ask Tina to come into the meeting. Yeah, come in. Just give me 1 second. Okay, I'm finding out where you can access it because I'm really not sure. 510, a commercial lease, the long form, and literally the poor kid with his palm against his head and looking down at his paperwork. This is how you are going to feel when you do your first commercial lease long form, okay? It can be a very frustrating form to fill out. It's not the easiest one, but it's a great form to use when there is a rent-free period. And of course, I'm going to give some of this to you as a homework assignment. Okay, so for everybody who wants to re-listen to this, Tina says that it'll be on our YouTube learning channel. So you go to a YouTube Century 21 Heritage Group training, and it'll be uploaded on the YouTube channel as a recording, okay? I think Tina's saying hopefully by Monday it'll be there for you. Let's see here. No, I'm sorry. Number 4 was not recorded. This one has been recorded. $511, okay? You can use 511 commercial lease short form. It's a much easier form to use than the long form. But if there's a rent-free period, Form 510 really makes it very clear on what the rent-free period is. Now, Form 511, you can certainly use it if there is a rent-free period, but then you have to include clauses in Schedule A, whereas on Form 510, it is very clear with the dates that are a rent-free period as opposed to having to put conditions and clauses in Schedule A. That's pretty much the difference between the two for that. So just let me check the chats here. Oh, there you go. Tina is saying, there you go. there. And you can see some of the comments, and Chris, I don't disagree with you at all, Chris. Lots of the times, Form 511 and the clause is used. I'm not disagreeing with you at all, Chris. I see both. That's why I'm introducing people to both. If it was me, I think today, to try to keep it simpler, I'd probably use Form 511, even if there was a rent-free period, because you can find the clauses in web forms. I don't disagree with you at all, but everybody's going to see Form 511 once or twice throughout their career for sure.
No, just because the main reason is because if you use some of the landlords, they actually use days rather than months. So if your lease commencement date is different, not all landlord, not all landlords actually will say the lease commencement date is on the 1st or whatever, because some of the standard landlord lease will say they will give you a letter and your commencement date, your occupancy date will start, but your commencement date is different. So that's the main reason why you should always use Form 511, because you got more flexibility there. Because on 510, I always run into a problem is that 510 you always have to insert the month, and you can't say the days, because if the landlord says I give you 90 days for fixturing, but 90 days is not 2 months, so you got to put in it's not 3 months. 90 days is 2 months and a bit. So that's why you really should use Form 511 rather than 510.
Right. No, great comments, Chris. Thank you very much. What Chris is referring to there is a fixturing period. And sometimes the tenant will be able to get into the property for fixturing, in other words, complete leasehold improvements on the property 60 or 90 days prior to the actual commencement date of the lease. Okay.
I'm sorry,
and
also you didn't take into account of the net rent-free period too, because if you lease a commercial space, you always get 2 types of rent-free period. One is the fixturing period, where you fixture up your space, and the other one is you get your rent-free period, your net rent-free period. So, but on that particular form, 511, they really don't understand the commercial aspect of it, because usually you put in the fixturing period and then you put in the net rent-free period. So this one is actually very confusing to use. If you got those 2 things together, you might as well just go back to Form 511 and insert the clauses, net rent-free and then a fixturing period separately.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you at all, Chris. However, I do see 510 on a regular basis, especially when 510 is used when the rental rate goes up yearly, is another time when 4 or 510 can be used. And you can always put the clauses into Schedule A for a fixturing period or a rent-free period. But everybody, I'm not disagreeing with Chris at all. The short form 511 is a much easier form to use in most cases, but not all cases. So I agree with Chris, but if you're just leasing a very simple place, then definitely use Form 511. And most of you will start off using Form 511 for sure. And I appreciate your comments, Chris. Chris has done a lot of these leases. I see both. Coming across my desk, I see Form 511 and 510, and both are successful normally. But Chris is absolutely right. 510 is a much more complicated form, and a lot of people don't like using it. So I thank you, Chris. I appreciate the comments.
I have a question here for Form 510 and for 511.
Okay.
I just wonder if the buyer go to see the lawyer, so which form they would prefer, or for the lawyer to review the clause.
Oh, well, my feeling about lawyers is keep it simple. You use the short form every time.
Oh, okay.
A lot of lawyers, a lot of people out there use their family lawyer, and they don't use a commercial real estate lawyer. And a family lawyer is never going to figure out the long form. A commercial lawyer will be able to figure it out without any problem at all. So be careful on which lawyer you're using, okay, Pauline?
Oh, usually they should go for a commercial lawyer. Why use the family lawyer?
Oh, there's a lot of people that like to save money, Pauline.
Oh, really?
You know,
Okay.
we had a case, actually, I'm still working on it. We had a little bit, I'm going to sidetrack and step away from the course for a minute, but we had a case yesterday where there was a sale where it turned out that the fence of the backyard actually encroached on the neighbor's property, okay? The buyer went to their lawyer and said, what should I do? And the lawyer immediately wrote back to the buyer, this is grounds for canceling the sale.
Oh.
Okay. I said to the agent, one of our agents, I said, I don't think it's grounds for canceling the sale if the seller's willing to move the fence. Okay. And then we went to a real estate lawyer, and the real estate lawyer said, no, just put a clause in the offer to have the seller move the fence. And that's what we did, and the deal will go through. But the first lawyer said, get out of the deal right away. And it turns out that they were a divorce lawyer. They were not a real estate lawyer. Yeah, so be careful, okay? If you ever run into this, we have a couple of real estate lawyers that only do commercial deals. Okay?
All right.
Okay.
Okay, so even for the 511 is also good for to see a lawyer, right? Even use the 511.
Well, you can use either one, but Chris Yip is absolutely correct. The short form is a much easier form to use.
All right. Okay, understand.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay.
No, I appreciate the questions, and thanks again, Chris. Where are we here? The commercial sublease. I put a submarine in there because of sublease. I couldn't think of any other picture. Include a condition for the subtenant to review the lease. Absolutely. Okay. They also should have a landlord has the opportunity to approve the subtenant. Okay. Now, in leases, and they're becoming more and more common today, in leases, there are what's called a demolition clause. Okay. The demolition clause in a lease for a commercial property means that the landlord or the property owner, whoever we're talking about here, they are inserting clauses into leases called demolition clauses that the landlord can, at the end of the lease, may not renew the lease because they want to demolish the place so that they can put up a condominium. So sometimes when you're talking into a sublease, the reason why a person wants to do a sublease is because they know that the end of the lease is coming and the landlord may want to demolish the building. Well, you don't want to have a tenant moving into a leased property at any time, and that there is a demolition clause in there that the tenant doesn't understand the risks of a demolition clause. And that demolition clause, quite simply, is that the landlord at the end of the lease can kick the tenant out because they are going to demolish the building. So make sure you have a lawyer's review of these things, so that of the leases for the tenant, that the tenant understands what they're getting themselves into, okay? So let me see, I think there was a chat there, 1 second, okay. No, Paula, there is no password for it. And you simply type in, you Google search for YouTube Century 21 Heritage Group Training. For sellers, so that was the buyer's paperwork. For seller's paperwork, listing agreements, all sorts of stuff out there. And so here's the list of things. Now, the listing agreements, of course, you can find the paper packages in your offices. They're all put together just like the residential packages. The commercial packages are all there for you. And once again, in your transaction desks, you can get all the paperwork online, all in fillable formats in your transaction desk. And I've listed all the leases here for you. All the forms for you. But in your transaction desk or in a paper format in the office. Obviously, right now, under the COVID-19 situation that we're in, you cannot access the offices to get the paperwork. So I highly suggest that you become familiar with the paperwork through your transaction desk. If you're not familiar with transaction desk, the video training is available on Train 21, and the video training for transaction desk is available once again on the YouTube training channels. Okay. Any questions about that? Right, no, so they're just what I talked about there. They're in your offices and they're available through transaction desk. Both the buyer and the seller kits are all available electronically for you. You can download them, you can print them, write them by hand, you can download them and they're all in fillable formats, or you can fill them in directly in transaction desk. So they're certainly available for you, even though the offices are closed right now. All the paperwork is available for you. Homework. Here we go. Homework. FinTrack. What do we need for FinTrack for commercial? Okay, what must you see? Okay, what documents are you required to list a commercial property for sale? And please list all the documents that you're required to complete to have a commercial buyer as a customer. Okay, so that's it for today, folks. Does anybody have any questions, comments, suggestions?